Hello, welcome to my presentation. Thank you very much for clicking the link and coming along, or digitally coming along anyway. My name is Thomas Stones and I work at Gakuin University. You can see on the screen there. And today I'm going to be talking about vocabulary learning and what the research about vocabulary acquisition tells us about vocabulary learning and how we can best leverage that to improve how we teach vocabulary in the classroom. Also, you can see my email address there, so if you have any questions or want to follow up on anything that I mentioned today, then yeah, do get in touch. Let's get into it. So why focus on vocabulary? Of course, vocabulary is vital to communication, and there's the famous quotation, without grammar, very little can be conveyed, but without vocabulary, nothing can be conveyed. So obviously vital to any kind of communication, and it's a key predictor of other language skills. So if people have a large vocabulary, they often also have good speaking skills, writing skills, receptive skills also. Also, it's a goal, building vocabulary is a goal for many language learners as well. Partly because it's central to many language assessments. Many of them either directly or indirectly assess vocabulary. And most textbooks have a vocabulary section in there somewhere of some sort. So the question I'll try to address is, are we doing vocab well? Are we teaching vocabulary in the most effective manner? I think most teachers would agree that they do their best to teach vocabulary. They would say that teaching vocabulary is very important. And most people would go through the vocabulary tasks that are within the textbooks, but maybe not so sure if we're actually doing that to the best of our abilities or in the most effective manner. So of course, there's a range of activities available to us, gap fill tasks, matching definitions and translations, flashcards, of course, very popular these days, and we can work those in both directions, L1 to L2 or L2 to L1. Multiple choice tasks often feature in textbooks, and of course we have incidental learning options as well, so things like extensive reading, watching movies to learn vocabulary, or task-based learning, task-based language teaching, where the focus is on the content and the communication, but the learning opportunities would emerge through the interaction and the task completion, either in preparatory stages or follow-up stages, without sort of studying the vocab, per se. So we have a range of options available to us. And yeah, next I'll present a few sort of common examples we might find in textbooks. So, I'm sure we've all seen things like this. They match the words at the bottom to the job types at the top. So sort of inferencing, maybe some dictionary use here. Also, then these types of tasks are very common. We can see a definition and a closed task with a closed selection of lexical items to put into the correct space. Also, another similar type of task, we have the target item in bold. We can infer that from the context, usually a meaning-bearing context, with a closed set of definitions to help establish the meaning. So a variety of options there, very common. I'm sure everyone's seen things like this, but how effective are they? Those type of tasks often are good as a starting point. If we follow Barcroft's 2012 input-based incremental vocabulary instruction, this is an approach which suggests that we start off with the easier vocabulary tasks and then build up to more difficult ones. So starting off with in the early sort of presentation stages of learning, in the first encounter, sort of a receptive recognition task or option with closed choices, similar to what we just saw in the textbook examples. Some sort of inference from meaning-bearing sentences. Then some receptive meaning recall, so a step up then from going from L2 to L1 and trying to recall the meaning of a target item. Then we might move on to productive recall, so going in the opposite direction. So going from L1 to recall then the L2, or having a gapped sentence, a closed task without options. Then moving on, a bit more difficult, adding in different elements of word knowledge. So adding in collocations, for example, or different morphology depending on the word, varying the modes. So going from sort of spoken to written modes, etc., audio and listening, etc. And then, of course, review as well. So a key part to build into any language program. Probably it's that final part, which I'll be talking about the most, I would say. So let's move along. So which of those work? I talked about various sort of options for vocabulary learning, but which one is the most effective? So in 2022, Webb et al. Did a comprehensive meta-analysis of 22 studies that focused on intentional learning tasks. They went through the literature and found that the 4 most common tasks that were researched, if not used in the classroom, but the most commonly researched intentional vocabulary activities were flashcards, word lists, writing sentences, and fill in the blanks. Writing sentences is where learners produce their own sentences with given lexical items. Then fill in the blanks is choosing words to put into the spaces. We saw a few fill in the blanks tasks earlier. Across all 4 tasks, on average, the immediate post-test scores were 60% for meaning recall and form recall. Usually meaning recall's higher in these kinds of things. So as you can see, this is immediately after studying the words. Only 60% of the words were retained, even on the easier meaning recall task on average. So it sort of shows us that if we just do vocabulary only once, it's not going to be enough. Clearly not going to be enough. And then on the delayed post-tests, the delayed post-tests in the studies varied from 4 days to 2 weeks, so a bit of variation. But yeah, in the delayed post-test, the average was 32%. So even just a few days later, maybe slightly longer, a relatively small number of the words are retained. So once again, just emphasizes the need for review and follow-up on completing a particular vocabulary task. So one session doesn't cut it, but not by any means. These are the post-test scores from that same meta-analysis, Webb et al. I'll not go through all of the numbers here. You can pause the video, obviously, and take a closer look. But in order of effectiveness, on the left, we can see flashcards was most effective, followed by word lists, writing sentences, and then closed tasks at the bottom. So in immediate post-tests, flashcards were around sort of 70% mark on average for meaning and form recall. And then in the delayed test also outperformed the other tasks, so 32% for meaning recall. Then at the bottom, we can see the closed tasks were the least effective. We should note, though, that in these closed tasks, the learners had the words available to them, so they weren't actually recalling the meaning of the words, but were selecting them from a closed list in most cases. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, recall and retrieval, and the importance of recall and retrieval practice. And another study also involving Webb, so Kim and Webb 2023 found actually equal performance. This study was a comparison of closed tasks and flashcards, whereby the closed tasks required recall. So the words were presented once, and then subsequent encounters, the words had to be recalled without being provided, had to be recalled from memory. And so therefore, in that case, they found the equal performance of flashcards and closed tasks. So the closed tasks works better if they involve a recall. So if the words are covered up, the learners can't see them. It'll be much more effective than if the words are provided in a list. And there's a few reasons for that. So some underlying concepts which are quite important to vocabulary acquisition, which I'll talk about now. so as I alluded to there, so successful effortful retrieval will lead to better retention in the long term. So trying to recall the word will help you to remember it, especially if it's successful. But if not, then immediate feedback tends to be the most effective. So try and recall it. Can or can't remember, then somebody shows you the answer is the best way to approach that. And if this type of practice is done regularly over a few days, for example, leverages key concepts such as retrieval practice, basically remembering the words. There's a couple of very comprehensive review studies there, Carpenter et al. And McDermott in 2021. Also repeated recall, so multiple recalls are necessary, and distributed practice effect. So spreading your learning out over a few days is much more effective, and I'll talk about some examples of studies that talk about that later. Also the desirable difficulty framework. So of course, a recall is more difficult than recognition. So it's harder to recall a word from memory than it is to choose the correct one from a list. And that difficulty is desirable, as the name suggests. And so if a little bit of difficulty is present, then it's more likely to leave a stronger memory trace, and you're more likely to remember a word. So, so some level of difficulty is good, and of course also the involvement load hypothesis as well, kind of related theory. So more effort involved surrounding the vocabulary learning will lead to better retention. So underpinning a lot of those kind of studies and research is spacing effect. So one of the most robust phenomenon in experimental psychology, less researched in second language acquisition than in cognitive psychology and higher education in general, but nonetheless there's now a strong body of spacing research in second language learning. Often spacing is compared to massing, but what is the difference? In massing, you'd study the same word several times in a row, whereas in spacing, there's some space between your efforts to learn a word. So comparing the two, if you had 10 words to learn and you're going to study each word 4 times, for example, in a massing situation, you would study word 1 4 times, so word 1, word 1, word 1, word 1. Then move on to word 2, do word 2, word 2, word 2, word 2, then word 3, 4, 5, etc. So do the same word multiple times before moving on. Spacing, however, you would do word 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then return back to word number 1 after you've gone through your list. So spacing is more effective than massing overall. Also, you can have spacing, temporal spacing as well. So, for example, studying a word in the morning, then in the evening, or spread out over a couple of days. Sometimes over a few days, sometimes called the lag effect, but also some people call it spacing as well. So those terms are kind of interchangeable. So spacing has been shown comprehensively to be more effective than massing, even though it's a little more difficult to do. But also spacing is a case study in the failure to apply the results of psychological research. A quote from the 80s, which I think still holds true, whereby even if learners have been made aware of the positive effects of spacing and retrieval effort and desirable difficulty, they rarely use it, even when presented with results of their own efforts. So studies comparing massing and spacing. The Cornell study there, 2009, compared massing and spacing and showed the results to the participants, but they still tended to believe that massing was the better approach, even though the results demonstrated the opposite. So as teachers, it's something that we need to emphasize to students, that retrieval effort's actually good. While difficult in the short term, it will lead to better retention of concepts. And that might be for language learning, but also any sort of concept. It's shown to be effective. So if we're doing some vocabulary learning, for example, how many words should we learn in a session, or what should we do about our spacing? So some studies have compared different amounts of stacks, so doing 4 words in a row, 10 words in a row, or 20 words in a row. In fact, it's been found that 20 has been shown to be the best. If you go from word 1 to 20, go through them all once, then back to the start, is going to be more effective than doing 1 to 10, then back to the start, or 1 to 4 and back to the start, partly because of the increased spacing between them. This is if you're doing your words in a single session. In general, longer spacing is better than shorter spacing if you're studying in a single session. And also some studies have looked at making the spacing gradually longer, and there's sort of mixed results there. So some have found that equal spacing and expanding spacing have been the same, and others have found expanding spacing has the superior effect. In a classroom sort of situation, it's difficult to control spacing such that it expands without the use of computer software and things. So just regular vocabulary tasks in class, you studying in larger sets generally is going to be more effective. Also, Nakata's 2017 study found that around 5 to 7 retrievals was the sweet spot in terms of longer term retention. So having a presentation phase, then trying to recall a word 5 to 7 times was generally the most effective way. So beyond that didn't make much difference, and then shorter than that it was less effective. So in terms of what that means for us as teachers, very good, or would be very useful to do end of class reviews of any vocabulary that's been covered in the class. Doesn't have to be that long, but a very quick review of vocabulary, just a quick 5 minutes, put the words up on the screen, pick out a few people to recall what they mean, or do something like that in a pair, would be a great way to very quickly review words at the end of class if they've been studied, for example, in the middle. Not always possible, of course. You know, lessons can get away from us sometimes, and there's not always time to add in a review at the end, but wherever possible, it will lead to beneficial effects in terms of language learning or vocabulary learning. So also we might look at spacing across sessions as well. So the previous ones I mentioned were all within a single session, but also studying spacing across sessions is also going to be effective. So starting from the top point, so a larger number of words, so 20 words, as I mentioned before, across a number of days is more effective than a small number of words studied multiple times in a single day. So spreading your learning out over a few days, a couple of times each day, is going to be better than doing it many times in one. So the second point, 2 times over 4 days. So if you have 20 words to learn, study those 20 words twice a day over 4 days is going to work better than if you do 8 times in a day, even if you have a review at the end of the week. So doing all of them across the week is the best way to do it. And then a few studies then have looked at the spacing of 1 day versus spacing of a week. And mixed results. So study number 1 found equal results on post-tests. So they studied words spaced by a day or spaced by a week on 4 occasions. So it was, for example, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Monday week 1, Monday week 2, Monday week 3. And they found equal results for 1 day compared to 7 day spacing. Study number 2 did something very, very similar, but with only 2 sessions. Spacing of a day or spacing over 7 days, and they found that the longer spacing was more effective, but any kind of spacing outperformed the control group for both of those studies. So in reality, most classroom situations, we can't control how often we see our learners or how often the classes meet, and so really we can only really work with the number of class meetings that we have available to us. However, it is good, if possible, to work in some midweek review if possible. If there's a LMS available, then posting up some vocabulary review tasks midweek is going to be effective, or anything, or for example, if you're using Quizlet, then using Quizlet's assignment sort of task would work as well. So yeah, another method for review, test enhanced learning. can be effective as well, whereby we can use tests, either credit-bearing or weight-bearing tests which contribute to a course, or just sort of review tests. We can use those as a way to enhance retrieval practice and to help develop a pattern of review. So some studies have looked at some different ways that we might do that. So, for example, one method, non-cumulative testing, as it's called. In this method, learners would encounter 10 words per week and only do those words in sets discrete from one another. So week 1, do the first 10 words, week 2, the second 10 words, week 3, the third set of 10 words. So then continuing on. So each week, we don't review any of the other words. This is sort of a control condition, really. Then also we have cumulative testing, whereby 10 new words are introduced every week. So week 1, words 1 to 20, week 1, words 1 to 10, week 2, words 1 to 20, week 3, words 1 to 30, and continuing on. And in this method, a selection of all previously presented words will be tested. So in week 3, your test might include any of the 30 words presented up until that point. You wouldn't test all 30 words, you could do, but it gets quite out of hand as the number of words increases. So some researchers compared these two approaches, and both research studies mentioned here, studying 100 words over 10 weeks, have found that the cumulative testing method to be advantageous over non-cumulative testing. Of course, has the disadvantage that words introduced in week 10 are less well remembered because they're only studied once, versus words introduced in week 1, which are studied 10 times over a 10-week period. Solution to that is random selection testing, where if you're studying 100 words, for example, you could provide all words at the start, and then a selection of those words will feature in each week's test. That's not been studied with 100 words, but it has been studied with 45 words over 3 weeks. So Kanayama et al. Gave 45 words to their participants and tested 15 of those words each week. The learners didn't know which words would appear, and they compared that to a cumulative model where it increased by 15 words over the 3 weeks, and they found the random selection testing model to be the most effective. Also, I've done research which is in progress, whereby compared those 3 methods, CT, non-CT, and RST, over 8 weeks. So we gave them 80 words at the start of the course to the RST group, and then told them next week's there's going to be a test, and 20 words from the list will appear each week over the next 8 weeks. Then there was also a cumulative group and a non-cumulative group. And the RST group was shown to be the most effective or perform best on the post-tests. Although their first week scores were the lowest, by the end they basically mastered those 80 words. Of course, that method doesn't align that well with how words are introduced in textbooks. However, if you can generate a word list before the course, give that to the participants at the start, have weekly tests as you go along, then anytime any vocabulary does appear in the textbook, you should be able to go through it pretty quickly, and also it'll act as some quick reinforcement of the words that you're studying during the course as well. So moving on very quickly, where to get started with choosing words, for example, for learners. Often it's good to do a vocabulary test at the start to see where your learners are at. So you could use the VST, for example, to get a sort of baseline of what their approximate word levels are. Making sure that coverage of the most common 3,000 words, it looks like 30,000 I have on my screen, but it should be 3,000 words, covers 95% of the BNC. And of course, other basic word lists, the new general service list, academic word list, new academic word list, TOEIC word list, etc., are all very good starting points for introducing words, if not using ones that are already provided in a textbook, for example. So next, move on and talk a little bit about vocabulary apps. Of course, there's many of them available these days. Here's a quick list of some of the options. Probably too many to count these days, but a recent study has looked through them all. So Katsu and Nakata have been through some of the more common word learning apps and rated them based on some of these criteria here. So options to create and edit your own cards, for example, speech recognition, software block size, variation, etc., etc. So look, they looked at a range of factors for a number of apps, and here's some of the results that they found. So the top two were Mikan and Aino. These were targeted to Japanese learners, and they rated them on the criteria that I just showed on the previous slide, as well as a number of other ones. They found Mikan to be the best overall. Characteristic of that one was that it had a range of information provided, so parts of speech and things. Similarly, Aino did as well, but also had a good selection of learning related criteria, so they had a good range of learning tasks, so productive tasks, receptive tasks, etc., etc. Memrise had ready-made flashcards for or videos for their ready-made flashcards, and also had automatic speech recognition. Quizlet did well as well, performing well because it had all 4 retrieval formats available for free. The other top 3 apps also had them, but they were in some way behind a paywall, so either the app itself was paid, or the different retrieval formats were behind a paywall. So they would, of course, have some tasks that were available for free, but overall they were paid apps. So top 2, however, are aimed at Japanese learners. So partly that's why they were able to provide such a range of information. If you have a different first language, it wouldn't be available, I would say. But nonetheless, those are the top 4. But nonetheless, it's always important to try them out and see what works for you and for your learners. Moving on to reading, of course. Mostly I've been talking about intentional word learning and word-focused activities, but of course, X-reading or extensive reading, which you can do using the X-reading platform, works very well if you read enough. Studies have demonstrated increases in vocabulary learning, as well as other skills as well, so grammatical knowledge as well. You do get a bit more than just words if you do enough extensive reading. Also, another aspect about reading is that if you make an effort to guess a word from context, check your guess in a dictionary and then write it down, you're more likely to retain it. Was one of the results of the Ujihara et al. Study 2022. So it's better if you check in a dictionary and write down your guess rather than making an inference and then moving on. So that'll be the most effective way to learn from reading. So finally, I'll come to a couple of takeaways. I've gone through quite a bit of sort of research and things, but my main sort of messages or main things to take away into your teaching would be, so gradually increase the difficulty of vocabulary tasks, so starting with receptive recognition, closed tasks whereby there are a fixed number of options to choose from, and then moving up to productive recall, making sure there's some retrieval effort involved, so recalling the meaning and then moving on to recalling the word is going to be the most effective way to do that. So yeah, productive retrieval opportunities are the most powerful, and then 5+ retrievals for the first session is going to be ideal. Flashcards, word lists, and productive closed tasks are the most effective. And if you're using flashcards, we can vary them by doing paired practice with a partner. So rather than using a flashcard, working in pairs, one partner says the L2, the other partner says the L1. Then move on to do the opposite, so saying L1 to L2. So again, moving from receptive to productive skills. And of course, vitally important to incorporate some spacing or review into your vocabulary learning menu. So, for example, at the end of session 1, I have a quick review, make sure there's a review at the start of the next session, or some sort of cumulative review or random selection testing methods whereby words previously encountered are recalled and learned. So, yeah, and especially in a test-enhanced learning scenario, RST is the most effective. So random selection testing is the most effective. So some of my references here on this screen and the next one. But if you are interested in anything I've been talking about, then do get in contact, and yeah, I'd be happy to talk to anybody about any of these kind of research methods or approaches to vocabulary. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully the presentation was useful, and yeah, as I said, do get in contact if you're interested in anything I talked about today. So thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.